Hello students, my name is Mrs. Rati Pillai and I'm a teacher at Palatilak Vidyalaya English Medium School. Today in this video we are going to have the third session which will be for question 3B, that is critical appreciation. This question is asked for 5 marks. So what do you mean or understand by a critical appreciation of a poem? A critical appreciation of a poem requires one to analyze the poem as a whole and critically provide insight into the elements which make up the poem. Elements of the poem are diction, imagery, structure, rhyme, rhythm, and the overall message or theme of the poem or the purpose of the poet. In other words, critical appreciation of a poem is the critical analysis of the poem wherein we examine and evaluate the strength, the weakness, and the outstanding features of a poem. So, how to prepare a critical appreciation of a poem? Now, you must remember it's the marks that are there are divided in this way. The title and the name of the poet or poetess should be mentioned. This is for 1 mark. The rhyme scheme used in the poem should be mentioned. This is also for 1 mark. The beautiful use of the figures of speech should be mentioned by giving 1 or 2 lines from the poem. So when you write this, you have to be careful. You need to explain this figure of speech comes in this particular line. Okay, and then the central idea or the theme of the poem should be mentioned. This is for 2 marks. Now let's go ahead and see what are the things that we need to remember. How do we put all these elements together and write the critical appreciation? So in order to write an appreciation of the poem, the following points need to be borne in mind. Firstly, the substance. The first thing to do is to read the poem carefully a few times, if necessary, until one gets a fairly clear idea of what the poet is trying to convey. Ask yourself what the poem is about. What is the theme of the poem? What the poet is saying about the subject matter on the whole. Then you need to focus on the language. Comment on the kind of language used by the poet. Next, look at the music, the rhythm, and the rhyme used. Here, a mention should be made about the various figures of speech used and the rhyme scheme seen in the verses. Whether there is a rhyme scheme, whether it is a free verse, explaining all that has to be done regarding the elements. Next, comment on the poet's vision or insight, the truth that he attempts to reveal. Comment on his or her attitude to life, nature, or whatever the theme of the poem is. Comment also on the significance of certain outstanding lines or expressions in the poem. Figures of speech, yes, they play an important role. Explain the use and significance of the figures of speech used in the poem. You can also look at the emotions that are generated by the poet through the various lines. Also, You can give your opinion about the suitability of the title of the poem. Now, again, organize your ideas under the following headings. Please remember, you have to organize your ideas. Okay? Now, why I say that? I will explain it to you later. So, you will write it under the headings title, poet, title and the poet, rhyme scheme used, figures of speech, and the central idea or theme of the poem. Once again, how to write a critical appreciation of a poem. Read the poem, know who the speaker is, the title of the poem. The step 3 would be to identify the main theme of the poem. Step 4, establish the context. Understand what is the writer trying to say through the poem. Step 5, identify the figures of speech used. Elaborate on any one of the figure of speech. Step 6, identify the genre of the poem. Step 7, the impact on the reader. What impact does it leave on the reader? Is it inspirational? Is it giving a certain message? What is it? How does it affect the reader? Nextly, and the last thing is to write in 3 paragraphs the analysis. Very important that it has to be written in paragraphs and not in the subheadings which are given. Okay, so certain points to remember while writing the critical appreciation. The content should be divided into paragraphs. Very, very important that it has to be written in paragraphs. Do not write it in points or in with the subheadings which are given under the subheadings. Okay, it has to be having in be written in a paragraph. There has to be a flow in the writing. Okay. Write the lines from the poem when stating different figures of speech. At least write one example where you see that particular figure of speech. So that kind of helps to understand that you know what the figure of speech is. Okay. Also, it will be good if you mention the lines which make an impact or bring out the message conveyed through the poem. Now, I like to explain how to write the critical appreciation with the help of a poem which is there. This is a poem 2.1 in Unit 2.1 Animals. Now, firstly, as it was mentioned, you need to read the poem first. All right. So, I'll read the poem. I think I could turn and live with animals. They are so placid and self contained. I stand and look at them long and long. They do not sweat and whine about their condition. They do not lie awake in the dark and weep for their sins. They do not make me sick discussing their duty to God. Not one is dissatisfied. Not one is demented with the mania of owning things. Not one kneels to another, nor to his kind that lived thousands of years ago. Not one is respectable or unhappy over the whole earth. So they show their relations to me and I accept them. They bring me tokens of myself. They evince them plainly in their possession. I wonder where they get those tokens. Did I pass that way huge times ago and negligently drop them? Now, so once you finish reading the poem, you need to know, you need to say for the title of the poem, you need to look at who the poet is, and then begin writing. Try to understand what is the message that the writer is trying to convey through the poem. Okay, so going ahead now, if I have to write the critical appreciation for this poem, it'll be something like this. Walt Whitman's poem Animals is a commentary on the present day plight of materialistic human beings. He brings it to the fore by comparing humans to the animals. The poet uses animals as symbols to point out flaws in humans and gives those flaws as a reason for his desire to go and live with animals. While comparing animals to humans, the poet draws our attention to the degeneration of human values of contentment and simplicity which we once possessed. A beautiful poem, the use of lines such as, they do not sweat and whine about their condition, and they are so placid and self contained, bring out the positive qualities of animals which the poet hopes to witness in humans. Written in a unique style, the structure type of the poem is free verse while the tone is reflective. The poem subtly nudges us to ponder over our plight. The simplicity of the language used is the highlight of this poem. The use of figures of speech like tautology, repetition, personification, alliteration, antithesis, interrogation, and hyperbole add to the beauty of the poem. The use of personification in the line, no one is dissatisfied, not one is demented with the mania of owning things, takes the poem to another level. I like this poem as it is an eye opener for us humans who consider ourselves to be civilized. The poet encourages us to reflect on our existing value system and learn good values and good habits from the animals. The poet conveys a clear message. The message being, he is more at home with animals than humans, who the poet finds to be complicated and false. Now, if you heard or if you're reading what is there on screen, you will know it's conveying all the aspects that you are expected to write. It is telling us about the theme, what is the impact, what is the message that the poet is trying to convey through the poem. The, the, the fact that there are very simple language used, very easy to understand, it tells us that the writer is clearly giving us this as the message. And then when you put in or when you give examples of the figures of speech used, the different figures of speech, plus you quote one line as an example from the poem, it tells us that you know what are the different figures of speech. Also, if you see, we have had or we are using the fact or telling that the poem is written in a free verse, which means there are no rhyme scheme in the poem. Okay, so this is how you're expected to write a critical appreciation in paragraphs, bringing out the theme of the poem, telling us they're writing about the beauty, the strengths in that particular poem. Let us see one more example. This is the other poem which is there, a beautiful poem in Unit 1, where the mind is without fear. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought of and action, into that heaven of freedom. My Father, let my country awake, by Rabindranath Tagore. Now, in this case, again, we need to first analyze, we need to first see what is the message conveyed by the poet. Okay, what is the beauty of this entire verse which is there? What is the writer trying to say? How is it different from other poems that are there? Okay, when we do that, we'll be able to write the critical appreciation as what is expected. Okay, so let us see how the critical appreciation for this poem would be like. Where the mind is without fear is a beautiful poem written by Rabindranath Tagore, written in free verse without any rhyme scheme. The poem is a prayer to God, the Almighty, asking for true freedom of our country, India. Even as Rabindranath Tagore hopes and prays for political freedom, he also aims for a country where the people live fearlessly with good thoughts, words, and actions. He prays for a country, a world where broad minded people live in unity without any prejudices and superstitions. It is an appeal to God for social, educational, and economic freedom for the people of India. Beautiful use of figures of speech like synecdoche, apostrophe, personification, repetition, metaphor, and alliteration have added to the beauty of this poem. Beautiful use of apostrophe is illustrated in the line, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Inspiring and thought provoking, this poem guides us to take the right path as we march ahead as a nation. So, this again, in this critical appreciation, if you see, all the points are covered. It tells us about the expected way of writing. It's covering about giving us the message, what is there in the poem. This is how the critical appreciation has to be written. Okay, so I hope you understood the basic important things that are needed when you write critical appreciation. So, with that, I end my session for today. Until next time, all the best. Take care.